Okay, and we are at 2:02 p.m. Eastern. I'd ask the panelists to turn your cameras on and we'll get started here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Again, I'm Edmund Breitling. I am with Class Technologies, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. I'm going to share my screen in just a moment so we can all see what we're going over. So let me go ahead and do that. And I'd ask that we turn the chat off. And here we go. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section of today's webinar. And if you've registered, we will be sharing a recording of this after the webinar concludes. So expect to see that within 24 hours, and we should be off to the races. So welcome, everyone. Upskilling Faculty for the hybrid learning, preparing for the new normal. We've got a great set of panels today to discuss these topics, and we'd like to encourage everyone on the webinar to also participate by asking questions in the Q&A, and we'll answer those as we get to them. I imagine there's going to be quite a few. So again, we're turning the chat off and we're switching to the Q&A section. Thanks, everyone, and let's get started. So here we go. Here's the agenda today. We're going to go over introductions of our panelists. We're going to talk a little bit about class as we're hosting this webinar and showing some of the features that are relevant to the topic. Then we'll get into our panel discussion. And then finally, we'll answer some Q&As at the very end. But if you don't mind, anyone that does have a question, please put them in the chat. And if there's something that's relevant to what we're talking to, I'll do my best to pull it out and have the panelists address it directly. So with that, let's meet the team here. We have Dr. Michael Marsh Soloway from University of Richmond. I have Dr. Allison Camacho, Associate Director of Language Studio, Jared Stein, VP of Education Strategy, and Allison is with SCAD and Jared is with Instructure. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with Michael.
Thanks, Edmund. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Marsh Soloway, and I'm the director of the Global Studio at the University of Richmond. In this role, I provide innovational instructional technology support to the departments of languages, literatures, and cultures, and then also Latin American, Latino, and Iberian studies. And I'm really excited to talk with you, to share ideas, and to learn about how you're incorporating new technologies for hybrid learning in your particular program. So thank you. Look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, and next we have Allison.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today, Edmund, and everybody at class. My name is Allison Camacho, and I'm the Associate Director of the Language Studio at Savannah College of Art and Design, which is a private art and design institution in Atlanta, Georgia, and Savannah, Georgia. And in my role as Associate Director of the Language Studio, I primarily support faculty and students who are non-native speakers of English. And we've gone through, like everybody, many different modes of learning with the pandemic. And I'm so excited to share what I've learned through this process and learn from you what you've learned through the process today. So thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks, Allison. And last but not least, we have Jared with Instructure.
Hey all, thanks for inviting me and letting me join in on this session. Instructure, of course, is the makers of the Canvas learning management system, which is used by higher ed institutions around the world. And in my role, I'm really just responsible for making sure that Instructure is doing the right thing for education and for our users. Prior to my time at Instructure, I spent my entire career, 12 plus years, in higher education, helping departments develop online and blended programs and doing a lot of faculty training. So this conversation is exciting for me.
Great. Thanks, Jared. I appreciate that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about class. We'll get through this and then we'll get to the fun stuff. So class is a tool that's built on top of Zoom, founded by Michael Chasen, one of the founders of Blackboard. And the whole purpose of class is to really bring that online environment that you're experiencing and turn it into a fully functional classroom environment. So adding teaching tools, student engagement tools, attendance and ID verification, proctored exams, seating charts, classroom management tools, and much more. And what's relevant for today is the hybrid support that we offer with multiple cameras, the ability to pop pop your gallery out and while still sharing your screen, and lots of really cool features. In fact, this is a mock-up of what's coming to class. So stay tuned for this as the product evolves, and we have lots of very cool features to make your hybrid high flex experience even better for both faculty and students. Enhanced breakout rooms. This seems to be kind of like one of the most powerful tools that every faculty member on the whole planet has been asking for, which is the ability to see all of your breakout rooms at once, right? So in this tool, in this feature within class, you can see all of your breakout rooms, right? If you're launching a specific tool to one of your breakout rooms, great, just goes to that one feature, to that one breakout room. They can then open up chat and see individual chats with each breakout room while still messaging everybody if you want to. So lots of really great tools and ways to enhance your breakout rooms. This is the proctored exam tool, where you can proctor an exam or really anything that you want. You could, even if they're working on individual work, you can see all of your students' cameras on the left and all their shared screens on the right. And again, this is just for the instructor view, so you can see exactly what's going on. So if you want to host an exam, a test, a quiz, whatever it is, you can do this in this tool. Very powerful. Okay, so those are the biggest highlighted pieces of class. Wanted to get through that so we could talk about our topic today, hybrid education today. So I think we have a poll. So what has been your faculty's biggest challenge with hybrid learning? If you have a moment, there should be the option to answer the poll on your screen. If you wouldn't mind taking that, we'd love to see this, and we can kind of kickstart our conversation here. Okay, so if you haven't done so already, go ahead and take that poll and we'll keep moving. And as kind of a base level, what I'd love to do is ask the panelists to help us define a lot of the terms that I'm sure that you are either more than familiar with, or if it's new to you, discuss some of these terms that are floating around education right now. You know, there's a lot happening. So there's our poll results. So it looks like engagement seems to be the thing that we're most looking for, closely followed by managing technology, course design, and then some other bits that aren't quite listed, delivering content. So that's really great to know. Thank you so much for answering the poll, everyone. So let's do this. I'd love to open it to the team here. Allison, can I have you kind of kick us off and talk about how you define, high flex, hybrid, virtual learning, async versus synchronous learning?
Sure. So we've all had all these terms thrown at us at different times, but definitely I'll start with asynchronous learning, which I think was the traditional approach even before the pandemic hurt, which lots of the e-learning classes where students were learning online at a self-paced rate without even meeting with the teacher necessarily via Zoom or any other tools. Their e-learning classes often were this way before the pandemic. And then synchronous learning, which is what my institution has right now, which the students are learning via Zoom with the instructor. Classes are recorded. There are also asynchronous hybrid tools brought into the classroom to enhance the learning. But those are the two terms that we often use. And then high flex, which is what my university did last quarter. And they've thrown it out, but this was when we actually had students on ground in the classroom and students online at the same time. So I taught in this way in spring of last year, and it was a lot of different moving parts. I always told my students it was like a mental jungle gym when I was trying to work out this modality. So those are some of the different terms that we use.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're right that that the terms do kind of change, and you try to keep up with it, and that's why we have webinars like this. And Michael, I know that you've been doing a lot of work in this world as well. I'd love to hear about what your thoughts around some of this terminology is.
Yeah, I think my experience is closely parallel what Allison just described. Our school also, we were teaching throughout the pandemic with this sort of high flex model. We had these huddle cams brought into class, and we were addressing audiences in the physical classroom. At the same time, we were addressing an audience online via Zoom. And I had a colleague compare it to juggling while riding a unicycle simultaneously. And I think that there's kind of a tension at the moment where, these terms hybrid, high flex, virtual, all of these are thrown around at the same time, but they are not mutually exclusive constructs. These things, basically as teachers, as institutions, we have to think creatively about how we improve the, brick and mortar infrastructure at the same time while we're continuing to produce and enhance our digital infrastructure. They really go hand in hand, and they're not in any way mutually exclusive. So it's crucial that if we have a nice campus and we've got landscaping and the students enjoy coming together and having that sense of community and Socratic dialogue, we should have digital methods to facilitate those same kinds of interactions as well. I mean, it's not like we're reinventing everything. We're taking what worked. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, taking what worked and delivering it in a new online or a new form of engagement that is, in my opinion, sort of the synergistic approach that is highly successful.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. And Jared, tossing over to you. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think definitions are important. So I'm glad we're taking a few minutes because, having precise definitions or as precise as possible helps us to have dialogue, helps us to compare, and really helps shape our mental models of these things. My input on this is that 5 years ago, I would have said that blended and hybrid were almost interchangeable. But today, because of the pandemic, because so much teaching is happening virtually and in class, I would call that hybrid. High flex is a similar term, but I think of high flex as adding that maximum flexibility for students. It can be online or in person. It can be asynchronous or synchronous, and students can mix and match to their heart's content. What high flex really requires is a significant amount of preparation and design ahead of the course, whereas a lot of instructors who were put into quote unquote high flex models during the pandemic didn't have that luxury of preparation.
You're exactly, yeah, yep. Yes, I agree. So with that understanding, let's move on to the next slide. Here's a quote, Jeff Solingo, who also was on a webinar with us a couple months ago, said, today's students are accustomed to learning by toggling between the real and virtual worlds. And so just wanted to throw that out there as something to think about while we move forward. So let's get into the main topic here, preparing for the new normal. So according to the Best Colleges 2021, there's a report that 94% of high school students today expect their college classes to have a virtual component. 49% of students say they plan to continue learning virtually even after the pandemic is over. So key learnings and insights. What instructional changes result from the shift to hybrid instruction? Should faculty keep moving forward? I'd love to throw that to the panel, whoever wants to chime in first.
I can start. Something that my institution is doing that we are keeping, even with on-ground classes, is recording the sessions. We have found, especially in my particular situation where I'm at an art and design institution, and a lot of what our faculty do there are modeling what is happening. And students really like to go back to be able to see what the professor's doing, was to be able to review it again, basically, to be able to see it. And so definitely keeping that going forward would help our students and faculty.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Michael, do you want to hop in on that?
Yeah, I think this whole premise, Zoom is here to stay. I mean, it's sort of like the cat is out of the bag. Even though we're back in the classroom, we're back in our offices. Almost all of my faculty meetings, my commitments, my committee readings for Fulbright and Gilman, all of these things, we are still meeting on Zoom. Just because it's fundamentally easier. It's the logistics of moving to and from. It's lower cost in the sense that you don't have to. There's no transportation. So I think essentially hybrid and virtual delivery is here to stay. And there's this an interesting quotation from Sonia Renee Taylor where she says, "We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, and rage." Essentially, there's still so much that we have to discover. And like Jared mentioned, the quick transition to the pandemic style of teaching. At our institution, we had 2 weeks, that luxury of preparation, thinking about what we can do to push the boundaries of what's possible, I think that we're only really just starting to have a sense of what's viable and what students can really do with these exciting new tools and instruments that we're giving them.
Thanks. And Jared?
Yeah, I think what I would like to see continue is, number one, the conversations about technology enhanced teaching and the role of technology in instructors' lives and students' lives. I think also the investment in professional development for faculty needs to continue. Yeah, I think one of the things that the conversation has really sparked is the sort of contrast between well-designed online courses and sort of just-in-time emergency remote teaching. And I think that that contrast is important because, you know, technology is more than just a method of delivering education. It brings its own affordances and opportunities to engage students in different ways, to increase access. And I think those attributes deserve greater attention and can be used to help inform and even motivate our faculty to use technology, whether they're back on campus or teaching fully online.
Yeah, I really love the way that the panel is answering these questions. They're different perspectives. It's so great. We did have a question in the chat that I wanted to send over to Allison. And the question was, what can colleges do to increase the amount of collaboration between instructional designers and instructors to help improve online and hybrid learning?
Yeah, so I think, before all of this happened, we didn't even know that we had instructional designers at some institutions. So I think that as we've progressed within the pandemic and gotten better with all of this online teaching, something that I've seen happen at my institution is, the support within our LMS system. We do have live drop-in sessions that faculty can drop into at any time. And I've been a customer many times dropping into those sessions to get help with whatever tool I'm using at that moment. And just knowing that they're there when anything comes up, whether I'm using my LMS system and my grade system is not working or a column is not showing, they've always been there supporting us. And also, I think having more of a presence with them at the beginning of the quarter. So whatever training your institution is providing, we have this extended onboarding process for new faculty that includes actually sit down sessions with the instructional trainers where they can actually work through their systems and their LMS system or whatever technology they're using and actually get things set up before the quarter begins. So I think having, extensive onboarding with them, having those drop-in sessions, having that platform, that community where faculty can go to see videos, they can go to get resources, all of those can help to increase engagement with the designers.
And, on that same note, Allison, there's another question which is similar, and I'd love to have you piggyback on this one. It says, what can colleges do to increase the amount of collaboration between instructional designers and instructors to help improve online and hybrid learning?
I think a lot of faculty sometimes don't know that they're out there yet. So there has to be, like I said, those drop-in sessions, that communication from the university, that people are there to help with your course design. As Michael and Jared have mentioned, these, this hybrid teaching, high flex teaching, this asynchronous, synchronous, it's not going away. And so having those opportunities, maybe it's between semesters or between quarters, where faculty can actually say, hey, this is what I'm teaching. How can I do this in an engaging manner, get my students involved, and who is there for me? And having that communication from the university and those opportunities for faculty, especially during the downtime when we're not so crazy, to sit down with instructional designers and collaborate, I think that could definitely help to make a more engaging course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Michael, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are some examples of successful faculty training and technical support offerings. What's out there? What have you done?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question that I think actually all universities have an opportunity to work internally to connect the dots. At the University of Richmond, I serve as co-chair of the Faculty Technology Committee, and we work very closely with our partners in information services and then also the Faculty Hub. but having these sort of constellations through which faculty could find avenues of support, and also even developing communities of practice. I think it's important that people come to terms with the fact that the landscape of education is changing. There are new tools and new resources. People aren't going to be automatically experts. So having this sort of willingness to be vulnerable, to share and learn collectively, and maybe some degree of trial and error is involved, but a willingness to take risks and a willingness to experiment with new technologies, I think will only yield benefits to the student. I mean, I think using tools and sort of taking an educated strategic risk to incorporate a new technology, it sort of shows the students that you yourself are willing to change your model of teaching. So therefore, they should be a little bit more creative and experimental with their model of learning.
Yeah, and while we're on that, that subject of training, Jared, I'd love it if you could answer this question that just came up through the Q&A, and it was, most of us were not trained in an online environment. There was a lack of successful hybrid class examples. I wonder, what is your take on creating tutorials, but also sharing templates from other users beyond of just explaining what can you do with these platforms?
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me most when the pandemic hit is how willing institutions and individuals were to share what they had been doing, whether that was the form of tutorials or templates for course websites, or even just their general approach to training faculty. So I think that community that sort of pre-existed the pandemic, but really kind of grew and strengthened during the pandemic is super important. And so there are a lot of resources out there, and some of those are just on the open web. Some of those might be within your institution. Some of those might be within a system if you're part of a state system. Some of those might be available through your technology providers. I think those resources are super valuable, but those are just resources, right? Those don't address faculty motivation, actual training of faculty, the experimentation, and the iterative revisions.
Yeah, and so speaking of, this next prompt here in our PowerPoint is who needs to be at the table to make hybrid instruction and student life deeply engaging? Michael, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a really important and meaningful question, Edmund. I think senior leadership. There's sort of this prevailing stigma. I've heard the refrain that. And this is a rather snobbish impression that online education is for other people's children. And I don't subscribe to that at all. I think that all institutions have a vested interest in understanding that on the online resources that we have, it's honestly, that is the future of where our intellectual capital is going to reside. And that, we have to think creatively to sort of orient the trajectory of our institutional goals, our strategic plans, to at least encompass some aspect of the future of online. I've seen in the chat here, there's a question from Anne about what constitutes online versus hybrid versus in-person as being defined by the faculty contract. And I realize that a lot of this kind of gets caught up in the bureaucratic labeling of, all of these different modalities. But in terms of who needs to be at the table, I think universities there has to be coordination among sort of faculty senate organizations, amongst information services representatives, instructional designers. It's crucial that we're all pulling in the same direction. And so even though there's been kind of this grassroots bottom to top promotion of all of these different modalities and experimentation, it has to be met with some acceptance and willingness to experiment at the very top. So I think it's always going to be a dialogue and a discourse that will unfold in somewhat unpredictable shapes and permutations. But I do think that all stakeholders need to have a say, and there should be sort of guidance provided at all levels of a university to engage these very questions.
Yeah, and Jared, I think you have a pretty unique perspective on who needs to be involved, coming from Instructure and being part of a tool that is brings everyone together, a learning management system. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think needs to happen and who should be involved to make things more engaging online.
Yeah, thanks, Edmund. I'd first draw on my own experience in the university. Part of what made our programs for developing and encouraging blended and online programs thrive was that we did have some level of grassroots support, and that was primarily in the form of instructional designers and technologists who went department to department, built strong relationships with department chairs and faculty. We also had top-down constructive pressure from the president's office saying, we have some real needs in terms of scaling our institution's ability to address a broader audience of students. And so this is really important for the institution and for our future. So top-down and bottom-up, super helpful. Getting that student perspective, also super helpful. And in relationship to my own work at Instructure, historically, we've sort of branded ourselves as a technology company, not an education company. And that doesn't mean we don't care about education. That's 100% our mission. What it does mean is that technologists can bring something to the table alongside educators, and we can find new ways to solve problems together.
So you bring up an interesting point. So what about if you're at a institution that doesn't necessarily have a dedicated route for upskilling faculty? There's no in-house unit, there's no support. What would you recommend to a school like that where they're just trying to figure this out on their own? What are some resources you all have used? And I'll just leave that open, whoever wants to hop in.
There are so many resources out there today, whether you're in LinkedIn Learning or Google certificate courses. I think, again, this is not going to go away. And whether it's within your own classes and your own institution to upskill your own learning as a teacher, as a professional, you need to learn these tools and be more savvy at them to grow. So I think there are just so many free resources out there that you can use to keep learning. Even attending a webinar like this today is another opportunity to grow and learn.
Yeah. Michael, Jared, I saw you nodding your heads.
Yeah, I think it's sad. It's sort of a tragedy when an institution cannot muster the resources for support for their instructors, whether those are instructional designers or technologists. That said, I've seen examples where institutions will grow these learning pods where it's sort of an opt-in faculty group, whether within a department or cross departments, where they can organize around a book or an idea or an approach to teaching, and they share their experience and their expertise without instructional designers being involved.
Yep. Cool.
On that point, I also really just wanted to second and endorse Allison's commentary on connecting the dots. There are so many amazing free resources or low-cost conference opportunities, virtual. I mean, essentially conference travel, I think, is becoming obsolete. I mean, as much as I love to travel for conferences, we are intimately connected with each other. And it's a little bit exhausting, but connecting the dots and just sort of not having that hesitation of stepping out of our comfort zones. There are consortia, there are so many ways to connect. It's really uncanny, I think, how much opportunity there is just to work across institutional lines or within our own departments. There are ways in which digital pedagogies can be leveraged to strengthen and enhance those sorts of bonds. So I think it's really wise to consider. And for those of you who are joining us, thank you. You are already starting to connect the dots.
Let's head to our next set of questions here, refining hybrid learning for faculty. So how can institutions keep faculty excited and motivated teaching hybrid courses? Here at class, when I'm, demoing the tool, one of the things I hear over and over again is just, faculty burnout, another tool to learn, another piece of tech to, try to simulate a physical class. What would you all say to that?
I'd love to address this question, Edmund. I mean, I think fundamentally you have to keep it as simple as possible. And I think that begins by starting where the instructors are, where the faculty are today. And that means where they are in terms of their technology comfort or skills, where they are with their instructional philosophy or pedagogical approach, but also where they are with their motivations, right? And I think support staff or instructional designers can really tap into those motivations to start the snowball. And those motivations are going to be things like their passion for their discipline. How can technology help them amplify that passion and make it known to their students? They're going to be motivated by the interactions they have with those students who also become passionate. And so what are ways in which technology can increase those interactions and make them more meaningful? And then finally, I would say they're going to be motivated by efficiency, reducing their own stress and workload for things that are extraneous to those things that they're actually passionate about. And so in that sense, right, you want to start small, you want to start where they're at and keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And you mentioned students a number of times, and I wanted to, there's a few questions in the chat about, students and what's their responsibility and how can they be involved. And so, Michael, I'd wondered if you could respond to the question around our institution has a concern that a number of young adults are struggling, suffering from isolation caused by the pandemic. So the goal has been to get the students back into the classroom and engage with people. Is there other research that shows hybrid virtual modes are healthy for college students?
Yeah, Barbara, thank you for this question. This is a fantastic topic for shared deliberation here. I've actually found that there are mechanisms by which students foster a sense of community in an online environment. And oftentimes they're doing this through informal social media channels anyway, but then giving them a venue where they can bring those networks to life in person, the two then sort of enhance one another. Where I have for instance, I taught my first year writing seminar. It's called Technology and Fantasy and Society, wholly online. And then in the following semester, I have a rotating monthly lunch group with them where I still get together with them and we meet face to face. And I realize that there's burnout. I realize that it's a lift to get the interface or the online teaching up and running. But in a way, it's kind of, I had a colleague compare this process of getting started with new tools as sort of like, it's time to update your operating system. You have to update your operating procedures. You can keep on kicking that can down the road, say, remind me in 2 weeks, or, whatever your timeline looks like. But eventually when you make the shift, you will find those efficiencies. You will find those, just like Jared mentioned, you will find extraneous tasks sort of falling by the wayside, and that's a good thing. So, working towards challenging burnout while also fostering a sense of community, the students will take to finding a digital sense of community just as well, if not more, than I think what they can do in person. And having that resource for them to work, the breakout rooms feature of Class for Zoom, thinking about ways in which they can connect more meaningfully, giving them opportunities to connect. Learning is a social enterprise. They have to learn with others. That's the way the real world works. And I think it's exciting the way in which the digital resources, only enhance what can be done in person.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And Allison, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And also, once you've finished that question, I'd love to hear about what you think the student responsibility is. It's a two-way street here for learning. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think something else to keep in mind is, a lot of our students today are, I hate to talk about generations, but they're those Gen Z students. They're mobile only students. They want fast and frequent feedback. And so yes, there is isolation and everything's in moderation, but by having these different tools for them to connect online, it is actually feeding into what they grew up with. I mean, our students today never saw the world without a social media or without cell phones. And so having these tools for them to connect will just enhance their learning and their opportunities to grow within their disciplines.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So let's go to the next question here. What ways can faculty build relationships and maintain communication with their hybrid students?
So I think this is going to depend instructor by instructor, institution by institution, right? Because every instructor is different, every student is different, and your student population is going to have very different expectations. But I think increasing the availability of instructors' time to students can help. Now, not every instructor is going to want to do that, but I was talking with a former colleague the other day, and he was astonished to hear that some instructors had actually made their cell phone number available to their students. And I said, what? No, I did that when I taught online, right? And some of my best interactions with the students who needed help the most were via cell phone while I was driving, late at night, whatever. And yeah, it was sort of an interruption of my personal time, but that time spent helped that student who otherwise might have failed. And so for me, it was worth it. For others, it may not be.
Thank you. Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, I actually think that digital channels of engagement have actually allowed me to have more FaceTime and more traffic with students. I have there's sites like You Can Book Me and Calendly, where students can make appointments, and it's, that fast and frequent feedback. I found that I'm able to sort of keep my my office hours are no longer 2 hours a week. I can, anytime I'm online or in front of a computer, there's an opportunity for students to basically connect with me. And I give my students a meeting either in person or via Zoom. It's a sort of simple Boolean, not to get caught up on the technical details, but I have this option of, do you want to meet in person or do you want to meet in Zoom? And it's an either or, and the two go hand in hand. I mean, sometimes students, if they're having a busy week and they can't make it to campus, let's talk digitally. That's perfectly fine. But as another kind of example of sort of ways in which the relationships maintain communication with hybrid systems, I do think that there's an opportunity here. I know that our colleagues at the Bonner Center for Civic Engagement use a tool called Spiders Engage, where it's sort of a tool that tracks longitudinal interactions between faculty, students, and then also community partners. And thinking about ways in which we can sort of track, and the tracking is not even the important part, facilitating that interaction throughout the four-year academic career, or maybe even before that, if it can tie into high school curriculum as well. Those opportunities exist. It's really just a process of connecting those dots and seeing what students can do with those opportunities to forge new relationships.
Yeah, thank you. Allison?
Yeah, we've actually seen an increase in attendance in office hours since we've offered virtual office hours. So students are meeting with their faculty members more often one-on-one, which didn't happen before. And there's these great opportunities where students don't have to make the drive into campus, and they can just come online and meet with faculty. Something else we've seen, I've seen personally in my classes that have worked, are those online channels like Slack or Teams, and not just, sending out those reminders, announcements about upcoming assignments or upcoming events, but also keeping it fun once in a while, so students can kind of connect with you and you can build that community, whether you're doing something fun like it's Meme Monday. Sometimes those little things also can help students to engage, or Feel Good Friday. You can send out those things quickly, and I think that reaches those younger students who want that community and connection.
Yeah. And so I'm hearing a lot about time and time commitments and how that helps. There's a question in the chat where, what can we do to help push our faculty who are already exhausted with time commitments and convince them to show up for learnings and trainings and hybrid and things like that? What would you recommend, to an exhausted faculty department? Jared.
I wish I had an answer for that question. It's a perennial challenge for institutions and for instructional support staff. I think, unfortunately, it's gotten a lot more challenging during the pandemic. The best that I can say is that institutions need to organize professional development so that it is, one, expected, but two, right, spread over time, done iteratively, done consistently, so that it's not a huge project once a year, but it's sort of spread out throughout the year and sort of incorporated with other faculty obligations and expectations. Some institutions certainly offer stipends and other sort of financial rewards to incentivize faculty to join. I've used those myself. I think they're just fine. Not all institutions are going to be able to do that, however.
So you just hit on another question in our chat, which is, what are the ways do you, and the person is Dana, didn't say incentivize, but how do you incentivize faculty to show up for those additional workshops and trainings? Allison, have you come across that?
Yeah, I think part of it is, what Jared mentioned before, meeting them at their level, and really, it's really about listening, I think, in some ways, to see and listening and showing, modeling, yes, we are burnt out, we're tired, we're exhausted, but we want to engage our students. We want them to learn, and just modeling how the use of this tool or this practice can save this much at the end. Just being able to show that to faculty to incentivize them in some way, I think can help.
Appreciate that. Michael, have you had any trouble with getting faculty to come to trainings?
Yeah, and Hamdi actually had a question about this, face the challenge of the extra load or overload. And we've sort of creatively addressed this difficulty by, the ask isn't so much, the ask isn't give me new tools. The ask is show me how to promote improved learning outcomes, or show me how to foster a sense of engagement. I think that you can be a little bit more granular in what teachers are actually getting out of these new resources, thinking about ways in which they are becoming more effective educators or thinkers or activists or artists. Talking to them about what this tool set empowers them to do is more the ask than sort of, this is an added burden. Show them how it will make their lives easier or better or more successful. So that's sort of my 2 cents on that approach.
Yeah. So there's some questions here. What are some of the tools and technologies that you're all using to help scale training for your faculty? And I know there's some questions in the chat about, what resources, and I know we talked about this briefly, where they're finding resources, but what have you all used to train your faculty? I'm leaving this open, whoever wants to chime in.
We're using, definitely, we've got our LMS system and our community of practice that has the resources and the videos. I've created my own Slack channel for professional development for faculty. I've, made a whole shared document with tools for online learning and different techniques that can be used, and for faculty can add to it if they want to show how they're incorporating it with our specific content. We, even again, in-person sessions, maybe it's a brown bag lunch session. Maybe we do have the funds to provide a lunch one day, and we can actually encourage faculty to come to talk about the tools or somebody to demonstrate them. So those PD sessions also can help for sure.
Yeah,
I would say definitely Zoom or other video conferencing tools. I'm sure Class is a brilliant solution for this too. I'll plug an Instructure product. We have a solution called Impact, which embeds into whatever educational technology you're using, Canvas, whatever. And it has campaigns that are targeted at helping faculty develop specific skills, whether that's just using the technology or incorporating a certain pedagogical approach as they're using the technology. So it'll be pop-up messages, chatbot, tutorials, drawing attention to things that they haven't used in the LMS before. So I'm hearing that a lot of institutions that are using Impact see a lot of return on investment in terms of that scalability. Sorry if that sounds like a sales pitch, but that question is right up my alley today.
Yeah. Cool. All right, let's keep going then. Let's see here we go. So what are the various equity issues that must be considered in embracing hybrid teaching in higher education? I know there's a question about that in the chat as well. I'd love to hear how you're each tackling that. Why don't we go Michael, Allison, Jared?
Yeah, so equity is sort of a pressing challenge in higher ed. A lot of these digital resources have transformed from amenities to necessities. Jared made a comment about meeting faculty. So there's sort of an equity concern from the instructional perspective and then also from the student perspective. From the instructional perspective, it's sort of this idea that we all share the same level of comfort, familiarity, ease or sort of the intuitive nature of navigating digital systems. And that assumption is largely, completely flawed. We all have varying levels. We're from different generations. Allison brought up Gen Z students. So meeting faculty where they're at with their own individual level of comfort and sort of engagement in digital processes, I think is crucial. And this harkens back to that training point, is that you have to meet faculty where they're at. Some faculty will take to Slack or to Teams or to the Instructure Impact tool rather quickly, but I also have colleagues who will not use anything beyond email is sort of a bridge too far. So it's one of those things where I think training across different modalities, different disciplines, offering a panoply of materials to help faculty of all levels and all backgrounds engage these tools meaningfully, I think is required. You're going to have a multi-pronged approach. So offering a diverse array of training opportunities, I think, is key. From the student perspective, it was oftentimes not a safe assumption that students would have reliable internet access at home. So how do you go about offering digital engagement? And we had to connect meaningfully with we have a telecom and multimedia support services. We were providing students with the Verizon jetpacks, but if they lived in a rural area, oftentimes that was still not even effective. So we had to sort of coordinate with individual students to, help them. Maybe they could go to a Starbucks where they had free, reliable Wi-Fi. And this is a problem nationwide. I mean, the internet is something that we use all the time. I mean, it's our medical records, it's our taxes, it's everything. And we need to facilitate wide-ranging access to it.
Yeah, I think, as Michael touched on, availability of technology or connectivity, I mean, that reflects one of the questions that's in the Q&A. It's a hard question, and it's a harder question when students are essentially forced to attend virtually or in a hybrid mode, as opposed to it simply being their choice and then an expectation they have to figure out. So I think for students, especially, coming back to the importance of flexibility in terms of hybrid education is going to be foremost. But I think there are other equity issues as well. And another one of the questions in the Q&A references the importance of accessibility issues. Yeah, don't use technology that's not accessible. Don't use technology that's not provided by a company that doesn't have a strong plan to continue to improve accessibility. It's just not worth it.
This is an example of what Jared and Michael touched on. Something I think in regarding technology is also the time zone issue. So the majority of students that I work with are international, and they are zooming in from all over the world. And you have to think about your course design and when are you making those synchronous sessions, and what tools are you using to make sure that students who might be there in the middle of the night and might not want their cameras on. And that's another issue with equity, thinking about maybe, there are faculty who say, turn your cameras on, be present. But then also there are some times when maybe students don't feel comfortable with having those cameras on. So those are also things to think about, the time zones and cameras.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a pretty broad topic, equity. It's one of the biggest things that I hear when I'm talking to schools is, how do we increase that, enhance it? How do we make the reach of our education equitable? So I did want to slightly shift gears. There's a really great question in the chat, and it's more about tactics. And it says, it's by Sean, and it says, would you be able to better cover successful faculty training? What does it look like? How is it delivered? What is covered? And how much time should be allocated? And Jared, I saw that you were beginning to answer that. I'd love for you to kick that off, and then Allison and Michael.
Edmund, will you revisit that question? I was typing an answer just as you were saying that. So
I think you're typing the answer to this question, which is, would you be able to better cover successful faculty training? What does it look like? How is it delivered? And what is covered? How much time should be allocated?
I mean, I think that deserves its own hour-long session, right? But I would say, kind of as I said in this answer, is it's best if you can start 10 years ago. It's best if you can have a program that is set up to be, sort of the expectation for faculty is continuous and ongoing, is incremental and recognizes where they are and where they want to go, in addition to where the institution wants to go. But other than that, I don't think I've got a nutshell answer for what awesome faculty professional development looks like.
I mean, something I've seen successful, and I think I've mentioned this before, we had, when we first did HighFlex at my institution, we actually had rehearsal sessions. We had the instructional trainers there on with us. We had other faculty members in our department, and we actually practiced out. Where are you positioning your camera? Where's your other camera? How are you doing with this? And so just having that direct rehearsal kind of a dress rehearsal and feedback was really helpful. Time is always an issue for anybody in higher education. Our onboarding that I found successful, we have a 3-week-long professional development onboarding for new faculty, which is very successful. I think the best part of it sometimes is it includes, sit down sessions where faculty can just work on their LMS system, or they can work on their course design, and they can get that direct one-on-one feedback from designers and institutional experts. And so I think that is a great design. I know not everyone has the luxury to have a 3-week-long professional development onboarding training, but that has been successful.
Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, this is Sean, this is a really tricky question to answer, and I'll throw a few heuristic models that we've used successfully at the University of Richmond. In terms of what makes a successful training session, for instance, there's a survey that I recently collaborated on with my colleague Kevin Creamer. It's called the MISO survey, Measuring Information Service Outcomes. And one of the questions is sort of, how do you feel you would better learn and familiarize yourself with new tools, new digital technologies? And the answers are all over the map. Some faculty prefer one-on-one sessions, some faculty prefer faculty learning communities, some faculty prefer sort of self-driven online tutorials, and everyone is going to have a slightly different preference. And I realize that there's sort of an investment associated with building out that multi-pronged approach. But I do think that it's helpful to consider that in relation to there's something called the SAMR model, which is it was developed by Dr. Ruben Putendera, which is substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition, where you're using technologies to enhance and transform your pedagogical landscape. And so I know that as we're sort of, I feel like right now we're kind of in an ecosystem of all of these different systems, and getting those systems to integrate effectively is a daunting task. But if you think about not necessarily the technology, but the goals, using backwards course design, what goals are most important for you and your students and your faculties, you can then start to target and hone in on those training sessions a little bit more strategically.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Let's move on to the next question is, how should institutions prioritize between providing spaces, technology, and workload support required to effectively teach hybrid? Michael, since you're last, why don't you kick this one off?
Yeah, this is a interesting question. In terms of, there has to be synergy. The synergies, the spaces should sort of reflect, they basically should augment the capabilities of the classroom and also our digital resources. So I know that there's been a big push in university higher ed to think about active learning, and then there's JL Finks, the incubator for significant learning outcomes, thinking about it all, the ways in which all of these pieces coalesce. They all have to be working. We all have to be pulling in the same direction. So I think what's required is sort of not being excessively rigid with labels. I think that realizing that in-person, virtual, hybrid, these are not exclusively, these are not mutually exclusive terms. Rather, they need to be used in concert with one another. And the spaces should advance and facilitate the digital resources, just as the digital resources should tap into what we have physically in our brick and mortar campuses.
Yeah, thank you. Allison, the next question, how can institutions use training to create a learning environment that can successfully respond to rapid changes?
Oh, that's a hard one, Edmund. But at the same time, we've been there and done that, right? So I think definitely, having the faculty used to a system, knowing that there is a platform, knowing that there's outreach in certain areas, that they know who to go to, where to go to be able to do this. I think as long as the institutions are able to communicate that clearly and people are able to find those resources, we can better respond to rapid changes.
Thank you. Yeah. let's go to the next slide. So here's a list of our resources that we use today. And again, we'll be sharing this out. So I know that there's some Q&A that we haven't necessarily gone to, and I've been trying to keep it in a flow with themed questions, but I think we'll just go through as many of these as we can with the 4 minutes we've got here. So the first one here is, as a teacher who uses quite a bit of experiential learning activities, it has been a challenge to include the online groups. Are there resources to help teachers like me who want to continue that means in hybrid learning environment? Anyone want to, I know we talked a little about resources in the past, but earlier on, but anyone want to field this one?
Well, I know for a fact that there is a lot of writing in the literature on how to build collaboration and group-based activities, even experiential learning, in online or virtual environments. So, I would start there and look. There's probably a good meta-analysis on some of those methods and their effectiveness. But I think also just kind of digging in a layer deeper to whatever technology you're using today and see what affordances it provides for groups and for collaborations. Maybe get a little creative and explore technology that might be available that you're not using thus far. And if there's not a solution, you can go look for one. There's probably a free or low-cost solution available on the web.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that answer. Let's see what else we got in here. There are many students who won't access help resources, including asking for help during live meetings or via email or phone. How do you help those students? Allison.
Yeah, so this happens a lot for me because many of my students culturally sometimes are not accustomed to meeting one-on-one with professors. So something that I do early on is, even at the really beginning of the semester, beginning of the quarter, I make an effort to meet with my students one-on-one, whether it's via Zoom or if you have an on-ground class one-on-one. And I just meet with them right away. And it might be related to a class activity. I teach pronunciation and English. So it might be, oh, I want to get your pronunciation profile, learn a little bit more about you. But getting them comfortable right off the bat and giving that sign up system with reminders to make sure that it's not just, hey, come to my office hours. It's actually, hey, you have an appointment at this time. This is going to be part of your coursework. And then just having them feel that comfort that they can have with a faculty member so that they're not so intimidated next time. We even give workshops on how to navigate office hours, because a lot of students are, and it doesn't have to be somebody who's not used to it culturally. It could be anybody who they're just not feeling comfortable with meeting one-on-one with a professor at first. So I think initiating that early on is key.
Thank you. Okay, so we're coming towards the top of the hour here. There's one last question that I think we should, I'd love for each of the panelists, if you could give it's an intense question, but as short as an answer as possible. I'd love to hear from each of you. We'll go Jared, Allison, Michael. And the question comes from James. And James says, I think there's an impression from both faculty and students that anything that doesn't happen face-to-face is lower quality. Are there ways that this is true, or how would you respond to faculty members who are hesitant to do something that will lower the quality of what they are offering as an educator?
Yeah, I think the most true answer is that quality is a result of design and execution first and foremost. And I think it also helps to acknowledge that online and in-person modes are different, and that those differences can either promote learning or hinder learning, which is why hybrid and blended is so powerful, because it gives faculty the choice between those two modes and sort of capitalize on those strengths or affordances and limit those weaknesses.
I think, just hopping on to what Jared just mentioned, it's not a one size fits all anymore. That doesn't really exist anymore. And there's so much that can be done, in person, then enhanced with online. And I think the more that we get help and support and guidance with creating those hybrid courses with all those different tools, we can see that it's not one size fits all. Both are actually can build on each other to create this engaging environment for our students.
Yeah, I echo everything that's been said. I think a lot of faculty look at online instruction where they only see, 180 degrees in front of the webcam. They see students turning their webcams off. And so there's a lack of awareness and a lack of understanding of the capability, the potential that exists. They sort of forget that we're on computers, that we're dealing with gigabytes, if not terabytes of memory and audio visual materials and interactive modules. I mean, the design has to echo and enhance the capability. So I think that, I think this James who asked this question? I forget who asked the question, but we have to convince our leadership that there's been a leveling or a changing of the landscape, so that even if something is online, that doesn't mean it's inferior. If it's online, or if there's a component that is brought up as a virtual addendum to an in-person course, it's meant to augment, it's meant to enhance, it's meant to push the boundaries of what's possible in that existing framework.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. I wanted to thank all of the panelists today, all of the questions, everyone that was able to attend. Thank you so much. Inside Higher Ed, thank you for allowing us to host with you. And Sidra and Vanessa, thank you so much for putting this together. Hope you all really got something from this webinar. We're having a lot of these with the whole series. The next one is on the March 29th, and it's going to be a continuance of the hybrid discussion. So please, if you haven't registered for that, go ahead and do that. Put on your calendars, March 29th, we'll have another discussion. So thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful day, a great week, and a wonderful weekend. Thanks all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Edmund.